Welcome to our deep dive. You guys send in some really interesting stuff on these Bereans and how they listened, especially to, religious teachings. I'm really curious to see what made them stand out as listeners
Yeah.
and maybe pick up some tips for ourselves.
Right.
We're looking at excerpts from a sermon about them.
Okay.
So let's jump right in.
Yeah. It might surprise you to learn that these Bereans weren't like off in some quiet corner of the world. Picture, first century AD, the bustling city of Berea in Macedonia.
Wow.
This was a place known for kind of a vibrant intellectual scene, kind of like ancient Greece, with all the philosophers debating big ideas.
So to be considered like remarkable listeners in that environment, they must have been doing something really unique.
Yeah.
The sermon even contrasts them with people in Thessalonica, who apparently gave the Apostle Paul a hard time. What set the Bereans apart?
Well, the text uses the words noble and open-minded to describe them. And noble here doesn't just refer to like wealth or social status.
Right.
It implies a certain character trait, a willingness to entertain new ideas without like shutting down. They were open to being challenged, to potentially changing their minds based on what they heard.
That's pretty remarkable, especially when you think about like how polarized things are today. It seems like everyone's kind of retreating into their own echo chambers. So how did this open-mindedness play out in practice?
Well, the text emphasizes their eagerness to hear Paul's message. Imagine that, being excited to listen and learn.
That actually reminds me of a point the sermon made about modern listeners.
Yeah.
And our, shall we say, challenged attention spans. It even suggests getting enough sleep before a sermon to be a more engaged listener. Isn't that interesting? I mean, I know I'm definitely more alert after a good night's sleep.
That's more connected than you might think. When we're talking about the Bereans' eagerness, it implies a readiness to absorb and process information.
Okay.
And we know lack of sleep directly impacts our ability to focus and to remember things.
Right.
So getting enough sleep could be seen as like a prerequisite for that Berean eagerness.
But here's where it gets really fascinating for me.
Yeah.
The Bereans didn't just listen and blindly accept what they heard. They examined the scriptures daily to see if what Paul was saying lined up.
Right.
It's like they were the original fact checkers.
That daily examination is truly key. It shows a real commitment to critical thinking, not just taking someone's word for it.
Yeah.
Even an apostle, this is incredibly relevant today, with so much information and misinformation flying around.
It seems like the sermon really wants us to apply this Berean approach to like how we listen to sermons today. It even suggests some pretty hardcore prep work, like studying for an exam, like pre-reading the text, taking notes.
Yep.
It almost feels like taking eager listening to like an extreme.
Yeah.
Isn't there a risk of overthinking it?
I think what's important is the mindset of active engagement.
Okay.
Pre-reading and note-taking can be helpful.
Right.
But they're really about creating the right conditions for deeper understanding. It's like the difference between passively watching a movie and actively like analyzing it. You get so much more out of the experience when you're present and engaged.
The sermon even brings up something I've struggled with, how a speaker's mannerisms can be distracting. Like, how do we stay focused on the message itself, even if the delivery isn't the most captivating?
That's an excellent point. It gets to the heart of separating the message from the messenger.
Right.
Our judgments about a person can easily color how we perceive their words. But the Bereans seem to have mastered focusing on the content, regardless of who was delivering it.
So how do we become more Berean in our everyday lives, not just when listening to sermons?
When we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really about cultivating active listening and critical thinking as a lifestyle.
Okay.
This means being open to new ideas, engaging with what we hear, asking questions, and checking sources. It's about being thoughtful consumers of information in a world that's overflowing with it.
Okay, that makes sense. The sermon also stresses respecting the speaker,
Yeah.
even if you don't find them particularly eloquent. Why is that important? Is it just about being polite, or is there something deeper at play?
I think it goes beyond like just being polite.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the power dynamics that are inherent in communication. Even if we don't like consciously think about it, there's always this kind of power dynamic between the speaker and the listener, especially in a formal setting, like a sermon.
I see what you mean. So even if the speaker isn't, the most polished orator, there's still a certain level of respect due to them simply because of their role.
Yeah.
as the one delivering the message.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging the authority that they hold in that specific context and recognizing that our judgments about their style or delivery can sometimes cloud our judgment of the message itself.
That makes me wonder, how do we balance that respect with not blindly accepting everything we hear? Where's the line?
That's where that Berean approach comes in.
Right.
You can be respectful of the speaker and their role while simultaneously engaging in that critical thinking process.
Okay.
Ask yourself, does this message align with what you know to be true? Does it hold up under scrutiny? You can do that without dismissing the speaker or their authority.
The sermon also makes this interesting comparison between listening to a sermon and receiving a message from like a king or a president.
Right.
Do we really give sermons that level of attention?
It's a powerful analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really highlights the weight of the message itself, regardless of who the messenger is. It challenges us to think, if we were getting a direct communication from a leader, wouldn't we be completely focused, attentive, and eager to understand?
It definitely makes you think about how we prioritize information. We might like drop everything to watch a breaking news bulletin, but sometimes we treat sermons like background noise. It's a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is, and it speaks to the importance of intentionality. If you approach a sermon with the mindset that this is a potentially life-changing message, your level of engagement is going to be completely different.
I'm curious about this idea of daily examination.
Yes.
That was so central to the Berean approach. How does that translate to today's world? Do we all need to become like biblical scholars?
I don't think it's about becoming scholars. It's more about the principle of verifying information and not just accepting things at face value. The Bereans used the scriptures as their reference point, but today we have a much wider array of sources to consult.
So it's like applying that same critical lens to everything we encounter, checking sources, considering different perspectives, doing our own research. It can feel overwhelming though, can't it?
Absolutely. The sheer volume of information can be daunting, but even small steps can make a difference, you know?
Yeah.
Start with like a healthy skepticism, not a cynical distrust, but a mindset that encourages you to ask questions and to dig a little deeper.
I like that. It's almost like daily examination could be a form of self-care in a way. Like we're protecting ourselves from misinformation, from being misled, and ultimately from forming opinions that aren't grounded in truth.
That's a fantastic way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating that inner BS detector and not letting yourself be swayed by like flashy presentations or emotional impulse.
Speaking of flashy presentations, the source talks about not being swayed by a speaker's charisma.
Yeah.
How do we stay grounded when someone is just so darn captivating?
That's a great question. We need to be extra vigilant in those situations. Remember, charisma can be a powerful tool, and it's easy to get caught up in the delivery and lose sight of the actual content.
So maybe that's where being extra Berean comes in.
Exactly.
Questioning even more, fact-checking a bit more diligently, and really focusing on the substance of what's being said.
Exactly. Think of it as adding another layer of scrutiny. When the presentation is particularly slick or engaging, you might even need to consciously detach from the emotional appeal and zero in on the logic and the evidence presented.
This deep dive is really making me think about my own listening habits.
Yeah.
It's not just about passively hearing words.
Yeah.
It's about actively engaging with the ideas, asking questions, and being open to, different viewpoints. And honestly, that's pretty exciting.
It is exciting. It means you have the power to become a better listener.
Right.
More informed, more discerning, and ultimately more connected to the world around you.
It's funny, we often talk about the importance of being open-minded, but the Bereans took it to a whole new level. They weren't just open to new ideas, they were practically craving them.
Right.
They actively sought out knowledge and then tested it against what they already knew.
That active seeking of knowledge is so important. It's not about blindly accepting everything you hear.
Right.
It's about having a discerning mind, a willingness to engage in critical thinking. It's about asking yourself, does this make sense? Does this align with what I know to be true? What are some other perspectives on this?
It strikes me, this whole daily examination thing could actually be like a form of self-care. We're protecting ourselves from misinformation and ultimately from like forming opinions that aren't,
Yeah.
based on something solid.
I love that perspective. It's about building up that inner BS detector, and not letting yourself be swayed by things that sound good on the surface.
The sermon also talked about the importance of considering the speaker's intent.
Yeah.
It suggests that even if you disagree with what's being said, you should try to understand the speaker's perspective.
Yeah.
And why they might hold those views. Isn't that a tough one?
It can be challenging, especially in today's world, where it's so easy to fall into that trap of only hearing voices that agree with you.
Right.
But it's about remembering. Everyone comes to the table with, their own unique experiences and beliefs.
Right.
And even if you don't agree with them, you can still learn something from their perspective.
It's like that saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Right.
It's so easy to just, shut someone down.
Yeah.
Or dismiss their viewpoint without really trying to get where they're coming from.
Exactly. And understanding doesn't have to equal agreement.
Right.
You can still disagree, but you do so from a place of respect, recognizing the validity of the other person's experience.
This is making me realize that this Berean approach could be transformative for our relationships.
Yeah.
Imagine if we all listen to each other with that level of intentionality, that genuine desire to understand even when we disagree.
It would definitely lead to more productive and meaningful conversations.
Right.
And who knows, it might even help bridge some of the divides that seem to be widening in our world today.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of the Bereans, what's the key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with? What's the one thing they can start doing today to be more Berean in their own lives?
If I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be to cultivate a mindset of active engagement with the world around you. Be curious, be questioning, be willing to challenge your own assumptions, and always seek out diverse perspectives.
I think the Bereans would approve. They've given us a blueprint for lifelong learning. For engaging with the world in a way that's both critical and compassionate.
And who knows, if we all embrace a bit more of that Berean spirit, we might just make the world a little bit wiser and a little bit kinder in the process.
On that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. The source compared a sermon to a message from a king or a president. Now think about all the other messages you encounter every day from the news, social media, advertising, even your own internal monologue. Are you giving those messages the same level of attention? The same critical scrutiny, the same Berean spirit? Food for thought. And until next time, happy listening.